NDIS report. On our screen tonight, you'll see Jackie Lee, who's one of our physiotherapists from our Melbourne clinic. Oodles of experience, has written plenty of reports and is surrounded by a whole team of therapists who writes reports day in, day out, right? So very well to sort of present on this topic tonight. Jackie, just to give you a bit of background on Jackie, she's a physio who's dedicated her career to supporting people with disabilities and has a passion for supporting the pediatric population in particular. She believes strongly in the health empowerment and supporting families with the tools and skills to optimize their children's well-being. And she's the one that put her hand up to do this presentation, and she's put a lot of work into this presentation to give you as much information as you can possibly have and arm you with all the information you need. She's worked kind of all over the world. She's currently in Melbourne, but she's worked in rural Victoria, in London, also volunteered in Ecuador. So she's kind of been around as well. So tonight she's going to take you on through the Insider's Guide to NDIS reports, talking through some of the reports that are most typical, what's generally included, what reports we can generally assist you with at NAPA in terms of assisted things for assistive technology and NDIS and appeals and all that sort of stuff. So she'll take you through everything and really the processes that sit behind them and the information that we need to make those reports as effective as possible. So welcome, Jackie, and welcome everyone. As we get into the topic, I will hand over to Jackie. Before I turn off my camera, just remember, if you do have questions during the course of the night, please submit during the chat in the chat function, and I will see you at the tail end of the presentation. Thank you, Jackie.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Yes, welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. Just to let you know that this is a presentation where we have tried to put as much of our knowledge into this and our experience. This includes my background as well as an LAC or a local area coordinator previously with the NDIS. I worked with Latrobe Community Health Services as well for a couple of years. So I know that this is an ever-changing space. I held the planning meetings as well. So just wanted to give you a little bit of insight to that area of my expertise with NDIS. We have tried to keep this information as up to date as possible with regards to our experiences, your experiences, but we do know that the NDIS is an ever-changing space and can change at any time. So we would like to encourage participants to make sure that they have, if they've got any questions or they need to make their inquiries, to try and get the most up-to-date information as possible, and make the best of the information at the time when they have their plan reassessments or they're going to make a request for some equipment. So just to kick off the presentation, we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. I thought I would start off actually though with the foundation of how funding is actually determined, and it comes down to the reasonable necessary criteria. Everyone has probably heard about this in this space. It's frequently referred to as Section 34 of the NDIS Act 2013. But what I thought was really important is to actually break down each of these criteria for you, so that just to simplify it, and each support that is requested needs to meet each of these 7 criteria here. So the first one here, as you can see on the screen, is around the support needs to be able to assist participants to achieve their goals as outlined in their NDIS plan. And this is something that can often be overlooked. It's something that essentially the NDIS is looking for. The support does that help you to achieve your goals? If your goal isn't there, why should the NDIS actually support that funding for that therapy or that piece of equipment? So that's just something that's really important to keep in mind, and things do change as life progresses for your child. So for example, we've got Michelle. She's a 13-year-old girl with cerebral palsy and autism, and her goals in her current NDIS plan are around independence with mobility, independence with daily living skills, and being able to dress herself. But she's going through a few difficult changes in her life. She's going through puberty. She's starting to become more acutely aware of the differences perhaps between her and her same age peers. And there's some difficulties with behavior and regulation of emotions. So her family's wanting to access psychology, but it's not in the goals. in the NDIS plan. This is something that you could access with your current capacity building funding. And then in future, if you're wanting to access that in your next plan, it's something where it's probably a good idea to update your goals to include that support. The second criteria here is around your support needs to enable you to be able to access the community or take part in social and or work activities, depending on your age. So some of our older kids that we may see or teenagers that we may see may want to take on part-time work, for example. This is a really strong emphasis here in the NDIS space. It's really important to highlight this in terms of when a support is being requested. So that's just something to keep in mind. How does this particular skill improve your child's ability to participate in the community? It could be something as simple as, say Michelle is looking to walk around in the community safely, and physiotherapy helps her to be able to do that. It's something as simple as that, but it's something to keep in mind for each and every single support in your NDIS plan. The third and fourth criteria tend to go hand in hand. So this is around the support being value for money. It's probably the one that people are most familiar with. It often needs to tie in with it being effective and beneficial, which is criteria 4. The NDIS does define value for money as being a service that is effective and helps participants to achieve their goals for the greatest value compared with other services available. And this is sort of that key component where we try and really target with our NDIS reports here at NAPA. It's really important for us to be able to report on your child's progress throughout the year. It is something that we go into a lot more depth beyond the intensive summary reports that are often provided if you do attend our intensive programs. The intensive summary report is just something that is for a handover perhaps to your community therapist. It helps to provide a quick snapshot of this is what we've done in these 3 weeks. But the NDIS report goes into depth around your say family situation, the impact of your child's disability on their daily function, and really sort of breaks that down for the delegate to be able to read and understand, and really highlights that progress generally over a 12-month period as well. So that's something to keep in mind for those 2 criteria in particular. The fifth one is supports being beyond what is reasonable to be expected of parents, family members, or generally the informal support network. This is an interesting area. It really is around, is this typically expected for a parent of any child, whether or not they have a disability? A common one that's brought up, for example, is around school drop-off and pick-up. Sometimes when I was working as an LAC, we would get families saying that they had a lot of difficulty because for financial reasons, they're needing to work full-time. They don't have the ability or capacity to be able to pick up their child from school or drop them off, and they need support worker hours. Now, from my own personal point of view, yes, and my own experience with disability, I completely understand that. In the eyes of the NDIS, they would say that no, it does not meet the reasonable and necessary criteria. But if, say, for example, little Johnny is 8 years old, he's attending all ability soccer, or he might be attending mainstream soccer team on Saturdays, but is needing a support worker there to be able to help him with communicating with his peers, being able to for example, socialize and manage his behaviors and those sorts of things throughout that time whilst he's playing soccer, then that is something that the NDIS would say, hey, he's accessing the community, he's needing support. It is beyond what parents are expected to provide for a child of 8 years old. Then they may say, yes, we can provide some support worker hours for that particular activity. 6 criteria is around everyday living costs. So the support that is provided must be related to the disability, and it must not be an everyday living cost. This is typically, say, for example, a classic one is gym memberships. Everyone who wants to access the gym, whether or not you have a disability, needs to pay the membership fee. So it is irrelevant whether or not you have a disability, it makes no difference. Then they would say, no, it's not reasonable or necessary. Another common one that we do get asked is around prams. And this is just kind of a bit of a special case because sometimes we have prams for children who have postural needs, they're needing adaptive supports and those sorts of things. It's beyond the standard stroller that you can get that's available on the market, and therefore it is considered related to the child's disability. So that might be something that's considered reasonable and necessary. But if your child is not really needing those supports and they can make do with an everyday, like a standard stroller, then that would be an everyday living cost. The final one is around the fact that the support cannot be eligible for funding through any government programs. That includes Medicare, public hospital system, community health services, or the Department of Education. And there can be a little bit of a blurred line sometimes with this, but it's just important to just sort of understand this one in particular. So things like teachers' aides, when you're working, when your child is in the classroom and you're needing extra support, that actually falls under the Department of Education. And that's where the NDIS would say, no, it's not reasonable and necessary. Same with things like tuition. Tuition falls under that sort of component around education. There are sort of questions often around that as well. When I worked in the NDIS as an LAC, unfortunately, I also had to decline those. But there were other ways in terms of, like, for example, psychology. That was a common one in COVID times, for example, whether it was Medicare or whether it was NDIS responsibility. So just some things to consider when things are being declined. Has it met all of these? Are you able to justify if it comes down to audit when it for your particular child's NDIS plan? So this is the thing that these are the things that they would ask you if that were the case. So something to keep in mind. In terms of the planning process, so how does it work? I'm sure lots of you have already gone through this, but what I thought would be really important just to highlight some of those little nuggets of information that might be helpful for you. So in terms of the plan reassessments, these can be initiated up to 100 days prior to the end date of your plan. What this means is that this is actually about 3.5 months prior. So you really need to kind of plan well beforehand. They can spring it on you at any point during this period here. So your LAC will, oops, something's happened. Let me just go back to my slides. Sorry, everyone. So with the plan, sorry, let me just fix my screen. Okay, so in terms of when this is initiated, the LAC or the ECI coordinator will contact you to arrange an initial phone meeting, which is typically known as a check-in call. It just highlights, basically, they're just trying to figure out where you're at with your plan. Are you happy with it? Do you have enough supports in your plan? And if not, what are you sort of needing? And are there any major changes coming up? So this could be anything that's around sort of major transition periods, such as if your child is, say, leaving high school and they're going into the community, or maybe they're looking to go into TAFE or the workforce. These are some periods of time which can be which can have a little bit more upheaval in your child's life. And this is where it's worth forward planning to think about maybe a couple of years ahead. How do we prepare them for this next stage of life? And then if you do require a full plan reassessment, then what they will organize is a meeting with your NDIA planner, and then the delegate will call you to organize that as well. So what supports can NAPA help you to request? Therapy hours, that's our bread and butter. We do include as part of this, though, our specific goals that we have for your child, whether that's the intensive goals that we have been working on. If your child attends weekly sessions with us, then it would be their 6 monthly goals in this case as well. We would highlight their progress in terms of the progress with regard to the goals, but also there are other achievements that we have noticed that aren't necessarily goal specific, but have been big things for your child. We also highlight any sort of recommendations as well in this part of the report too. What are some of the things that we can mention but not necessarily provide justification for? What I mean by that is that sometimes we do get asked around additional therapies such as music therapy or psychology and positive behavior support. These are some common ones that do come up. It's not that we're not happy to say that this has been beneficial if you are finding it is beneficial for your child. It's just that it is a little bit outside of our therapist's scope. You know, I am a physiotherapist. I don't know anything about music therapy, and that would be similar for some of our other therapists as well here at NAPA. So it's just something to keep in mind, that we are able to say that, say, for example, little Johnny's parents have reported that music therapy has been really beneficial to help him with regulating his emotions. This seems to have had a positive benefit, of which we have noticed that he is more calm as therapies here at NAPA. We'd ask you to refer to the music therapist's report. So we would then indicate for the delegate to be able to refer on to the appropriate report to actually find out the necessary recommendations that that particular therapist has made. This is the same with your weekly therapists. Sorry, not weekly therapists. This is the same with your community therapists as well, if they have additional recommendations on their end too. In terms of the consumables, or otherwise known as low-cost assistive technology, this is for any single item that costs $1,500. So what I mean by that is you could have a consumables budget up to $6,000, but any single item that you put through can only be $1,500. These need to abide by the NDIS reasonable and necessary criteria, or RNN criteria. It's the guidelines that we as well, by therapists, are we have to abide by as well if we are doing clinical justifications for this. So that's something that we need to be able to do here on our end at NAPA as well. What items are not covered? There are some common ones that have been asked in the past, either here at NAPA or during my experience as an LAC. Things like weighted blankets, chew necklaces are considered health risks according to the NDIA, so they will not fund these items if we do ask for them. So it's just something to keep in mind. Chew necklaces are known as a choking hazard according to the NDIA. Weighted blankets also have a negative impact, I think. So there's some evidence that the NDIA actually quotes on their website. So it's worth looking that up if it is something you are interested in, but it is something that is not covered by the NDIA. Fidget toys I've listed there as an example of an everyday item. It's actually not a lot of, often this is not actually funded by the NDIS. Sometimes it can slip through, but typically no, it's not. It's considered as an everyday item in the eyes of the NDIS. Similarly, the swing sets, play equipment, cubby houses, things for your child to play with, they're considered as everyday items as well. So they will not be funded by the NDIS with regards to that. What are some of the gray area items? The gray area items are often the ones that you just need to make sure that you have the justification there, and that's on us as well as therapists when we write. So it's really important that if you are looking for this, you specify it, and we therefore then can write the justification for that. It's not a lengthy thing, but we just need to be able to say, hey, for noise cancelling headphones, little Johnny is very sensitive and has auditory processing difficulties and has sensory overload. If he has too much noise, and noise cancelling headphones are a way for him to be able to remain in a social environment with his peers without feeling overwhelmed. Something along those lines. Similarly with iPads and tablets, often around communication or education or fine motor. Those are just some of the examples there around consumables. Mid-cost assistive technology. This is any item between $1,500 and $15,000. These are quite large items. They're commonly things like walkers, standing frames, adaptive seating, adaptive car seats, adaptive trikes. They all tend to fall in this bucket. A little bit of background is that previously when I first started as an LAC, this line item didn't exist. It was a consumables, or everyone has to do an AT application, and it was quite chaotic to say the least. The idea behind the mid-cost line item was to help to try and reduce the waiting times for equipment. I don't know if that's necessarily worked. I know that there have been some really long wait times for the equipment, but previously the wait times were even longer as well. So in some ways, I think it has helped to try and get the funding in through faster. And that was some of the difficulties that the NDIS was facing and that a lot of families are facing. They had all the reports, they had the quotes, but they couldn't get the funding in the plan. So that was the idea behind the mid-cost line item. How does it work? It's something that if you are self-managing your budget, or even if you're plan managed, but you are still overseeing your budget, it's really important to understand this particular bit. This is a one-off line item. So you'll see typically in your capital budget, it's the last part of the budget that's explained. You'll see often the numbers there. It would be like a $5,000 line item, $10,000, $15,000. That's probably something that's immediately available to you now. What that means though is that the line item can only be used once. So if, for example, you've got funding for a Riften Pacer, you've popped that in, it's $15,000 in the line item. And perhaps you've gone through, you're like, oh, the walker's really good. Actually, I've decided to get a different walker. That's completely fine if you get a different walker. If it's not suitable, it's not suitable. But what happens is if the cost, say, is different and it's only, say, $8,000, and you're like, oh, great, I have $7,000 left over. That's not actually the case. That money goes as soon as you make that purchase with the NDIS. That whole $15,000 line item will go. You do not have extra if you buy something that is less necessarily. Just something to keep in mind if you are trying to budget for your capital, if something has come up. With regards to the high cost items, oh, sorry, I haven't finished the mid-cost yet. So in terms of the supporting letters, yes, you will need a supporting letter for your mid-cost items. For each, it might be if you've got a couple of mid-cost items coming through, we'll pop it all through as one letter, but each piece does take us about 30 minutes to write or so here at NAPA. So that's how we sort of will break it down. What we do provide is when you are doing your mid-cost application, we do provide a written mid-cost evidence, which is essentially our clinical justification for this piece. And this is for the plan to tell the planners, hey, these are the benefits, these are the things that will happen if we don't get this piece of equipment, and to just justify it to the delegate that it goes to. There is also here at NAPA, we do also offer the written advice for the pieces of equipment that you do get. This is just to help cover yourselves and us as therapists here at NAPA to say, hey, you know, you've purchased it, it's finally come through your funding, you've managed to purchase this Riften Pacer, for example, then you let us know, and then we can just write in a quick, you know, 2-sentence letter saying, Johnny has cerebral palsy, and we advise that he uses a Riften walker to help him with his mobility. And it's as simple as that. That written advice doesn't cost anything extra to you, but it does help cover you if you do get audited by the NDIS to say, hey, this is therapist recommended. In terms of trials, the trials are something that are really variable and really dependent on individual circumstances and the types of equipment. So for example, you haven't trialed a walker before, you're needing to trial that, or you're trying to figure out what kind of walker suits, you're probably going to do a trial anyway to figure out which way are we going to go. Do we need something more supportive? Can we get away with something like less support, like a K walker or a Nimbo, or do they need something in between, like a croc walker? I talk about walkers a lot as a physiotherapist, but that's sort of my bread and butter, just as an example. but you might have on the other end a second skin, and those are such a tailored device. It's a tailored suit for your child's needs. There is no way to actually trial that beforehand. So that is something where, we may have trialed like a jet proof or a Spiro prior and say, hey, actually they're responding quite well, or maybe you've done TOGs, but you're needing something that's a bit more for everyday use or long-term, longer supports throughout the day. And that might be something else. So it's really dependent, and I would advise you to speak with your therapist and also to speak with your local report lead as well. Do you need a quote? Technically, no. You actually don't need a quote if you are submitting things to the NDIS. So you might be in a little bit of a jam where you've got the reports from us, but you're waiting on the supplier to give you the quote. Go ahead and submit it. If that's the case, you don't necessarily need the quote. It states on the NDIS website that you don't need that. We do get them though, however, here at NAPA anyway, we do get them just in terms to help us determine which category is it going to fall in under. Some of the adaptive seating can actually fall into the high cost category, so it just helps us. So if we do get it, we'll definitely forward that on to you. Just something to keep in mind. High cost AT, this is anything over $15,000. And just to explain the process behind this is something that the NDIS requires the therapist to be able to complete an 18-page justification document. It is really lengthy for us as therapists to complete. There's a lot of detail that is required by the NDIS. We also do need to often complete multiple trials of different types of equipment to show the NDIS that, hey, the one that we are recommending is definitely the best value for money. We have trialed a number of options that do not suit for XYZ reasons. Due to the amount of information that is required, our therapists do take about 5 hours to actually complete that. It is really lengthy, and so I would suggest here and strongly recommend that you give us about 6 weeks notice at least to be able to try and complete this in time. This may actually need to be longer if you are submitting this with an NDIS report. So I had a family in the past who had submitted this request actually about 5 months in advance. They submitted it in November for a report to be completed by February this year. And it's because they knew that they had a high cost AT coming their way. They were getting an eye gaze device, and they just wanted to make sure, particularly with Christmas and New Year, that this was also going to be done in time. What else can you do, or what else can you do to support your NDIS funding requests? This is a little bit of a challenging space. It always comes down to budgets and things like that when it is the NDIS. But what we do try and offer here at NAPA is we try to be as cohesive as we can with your community therapists in particular. So I have done telehealth meetings before with community therapists to be able to make sure that we are in line with one another, that what I'm recommending is similar to what they're recommending. Our assessments also line up. Is this what we're looking at? And just to make sure that what we've got, when we're presenting it in our own reports, it's a cohesive piece for our families that we're working with. So it's something to keep in mind that if you do have community therapists, we're more than happy to offer telehealth services to be able to do that. And it's really important just to really understand what it is that community is covering, what is that we're covering as well here at NAPA, and that we make sure that our recommendations sort of line up. In terms of the reports themselves, it is actually really critical. As an LAC, with my LAC hat on, having regular reports is actually something that is considered as evidence for the trajectory of your child's progress, essentially. And this is something that I would recommend for the families to get at the end of their NDIS plan, regardless of whether or not their plan rolls over or if you have to undergo a full plan reassessment. The reason being is that you have that evidence actually captured for your child's progress for that full 12 months. And that's something that you could refer back to over time. Say, even if it has rolled over, you haven't necessarily had a meeting, but then the following year you do have a full plan reassessment and you've got then 2 reports to be like, hey, this is the last 24 months for my child's progress. This is where we're at now. So it can be a very powerful thing, and it's something that I would highly recommend families to have, so that you have as much evidence as you need to support your funding requests with the NDIS. We had a question around carer statements, and this is something that's not essential, but can have a really big impact with the meetings with the delegates. Because the carer statements really provide a snapshot of your family's daily life. And this is where families need to be really honest and realistic. It can be really hard to write for families. I have had telehealth sessions where I've supported families with being able to go through how to write a carer impact statement. I've done that as a physio here at NAPA. I've done that as an LAC as well. And it's a good way to sort of highlight the impact of your child's disability on daily life for them, daily life as a family as well. I think that that's really important to highlight. It's really good to also outline your current support network. And sometimes you have very, very limited support. Maybe grandma comes once a week. Maybe you don't have any relatives nearby. That's something that's worth highlighting in your NDIS report, in your carer statement, sorry, just so that the NDIS knows that this is your current situation. And finally, I think another really impactful part is actually highlighting how much of your time are you spent, do you spend your day with your child being a carer, and how much do you actually spend with them being a parent? And this is something that is really worth thinking about and worth emphasizing on when you highlight, when you are writing your carer impact statement. So some further information can be found here at this link. You'll see this on the slide with My Care Space. They just provide a little bit more detail about this process, but if you also want help with your therapist that do know you really well, or the report lead can help you, we're more than happy to organize telehealth sessions with that as well if you need. What are some of the things that should be supported by your community therapist? So this are things like generally supports that are more suitable for things at home or in the community, such as schools or kinders. So that could be bed supports, things like high-low beds, pressure mattresses. We know the theory behind it here, but it's actually about trialing the equipment in your actual space and you being able to say, for example, with the bed, can you manage the transfer in and out, and actually practicing that in your space. And unfortunately here at NAPA, we don't do those community visits, and that's something where it's better supported by your community therapist. Similarly, the home modifications includes things like little shower rails, maybe that you've got, or rails for the toilet. Ramps kind of fall into the home mods options as well. That is better suited for your local therapist to be able to do with you. Same with car modifications too. What about other support, such as support worker hours and support coordination? We get asked this quite a lot here. And in terms of our NDIS reports, they are predominantly focused on therapy as such. But we are able to make, depending on your child's circumstances, we can highlight to the NDIS what the current situation is for you and your family, your child. What are they going through currently, and how additional supports could be beneficial for your child, or if your current supports are supporting your needs, then these are helping little Johnny, for example, to be able to achieve X, Y, Z. In terms of our NDIS therapy reports, we are not, it's not really our space to be able to provide recommendations for actual specific hours. That's something that is outside of our therapist's scope, but we can say, hey, this family is going through quite a difficult time. There's been a lot of changes in the family life. Say, for example, husband has taken a job that is interstate and will not actually be present, or a second child is born with a disability. This is where we can say this is a complex and challenging time for this family, and support coordination could be beneficial for that, but we wouldn't really be able to recommend specific hours. It's something that you would need to discuss with your delegate directly. So how can you prepare for the plan reassessment meeting? With regards to our NDIS reports, I would advise strongly to try and start the requests around 4.5 to 5.5 months prior to your NDIS plan date. The reason being is that often it takes time for therapists to really, be able to process that report, be able to write everything up amongst all of the appointments that they need to have. Things just take time. So I would suggest getting this ahead of time, around this 4.5 to 5.5 month mark, not just from NAPA, but from all of your therapists and from all of the supports that you do have. They all just take time, unfortunately, and it's good to just be prepared ahead of the 100-day mark, which they can start initiating the plan reassessment. So for NAPA here, we have our NAPA report requests via our drop form request link. So that's just at napacenter.com.au/reports. With regards to our process, we really, in order for us to ensure that we get your report completed in time, we do require about 6 weeks notice, or around 45 days notice. We often get things last minute, and we do our best to try and squeeze that in, but sometimes it's just not possible between intensive schedules, weekly schedules, and trying to fit all of the kids' therapies in, plus all of the report writing time in. It can be really tricky for us. So we do ask that you try and give us as much notice as possible. It also allows us time to process your requests. So our report leads, I'm the report lead down in Melbourne, but we do have report leads in Sydney and Brisbane. And we have allocated times for our admin time for the reports as well. So sometimes we might be off sick, or we've been slammed with work, or had to do coverage, and we haven't just had the time to be able to process your request. So we might not process it within 1 to 2 days. It might be like 3 or 4 or 5 days later sometimes. So we try not to do that, but it is just something to keep in mind as well when you are making that request. We also need to have time to allocate things in schedules as well. So that's why we need such a large chunk of time to be able to do that. In order to help speed up the process as well, because sometimes our therapists do spend a fair bit of time calling back and forth to try and find out a little bit more information, particularly things around NDIS goals. We really do need those goals, because what we write, all of the progress that your child makes, it's related back to those NDIS goals. It's something that's really important for our therapists. It really helps if that is just included in the drop form. Similarly, things around equipment. Often we get lists of equipment that come through, but then we spend a lot of time trying to figure out which ones are covered by NAPA, which ones are covered by community therapists. It would be really helpful for the drop form request to just include the pieces of equipment that will be covered by NAPA. That way our staff can just look at it and be like, yep, we're covering high-low chair, Rift and walker, and a communication device. So covering all of those areas. And it's quite straightforward from that point on, rather than going back and forth. The other one is low-cost items. Often we get things like, whatever the therapist recommends, or it might be just, yes, we need them, but there's no description of what you actually need. It really helps if you've had give us a description of like the items that you're thinking of, or maybe you've had a chat with your therapist beforehand, and then you're able to pop all those items in. It does just allow us to be able to provide those justifications for the NDIS, because when the plans are built, they do it dollar for dollar now. They don't do block funding anymore. We used to be able to do that when I was planning, but unfortunately they don't allow that anymore. So we do need dollar for dollar amounts and specific equipment as well. When to submit for AT reports. This is something that can happen at any time. So if you have had your plan, your child's outgrown their walker, or you're thinking new pieces of equipment, this is when you undergo the AT process here. So submit the job form request for new equipment as soon as possible. You might be pending for a trial, but at least your therapist, you most likely have already talked about it with your therapist, because they'll be organizing a trial for you, or they would need to do the report for you. So I can schedule that in, or the report lead can schedule that in ASAP and try and get that sorted. For existing equipment, something to keep an eye on for parents and therapists, but it's when your child starts to reach the end of the growth range that is available. So don't leave it to the very last minute when there's no growth range left, because we do know that equipment takes time. Around that 3 to 6 month mark, you kind of want to start looking like that's when how long it's sort of taking, typically 3-month mark for equipment. So start looking a little bit ahead and thinking, okay, we might need to start this process now. In terms of the other parts with the equipment is when your therapist or you observe that the equipment is no longer appropriate for your child. So this could be a positive thing. This could be the fact that the Rift and Walker is too heavy for your child, and it's no longer appropriate for them to have that high level of support. You know, they could manage with perhaps a croc walker and something that's just around their pelvis and maybe some gutter arm supports, and that's a fantastic thing. But it's something that, okay, we'll need to undergo this process to be able to request it, and that's where we would need additional justification, basically go through a new mid-cost written evidence letter for that. Also for modifications and repairs, try and get those in as soon as possible if you don't have enough funding in your budget. The NDIS ideally should have included in repairs, maintenance, and rental for each piece of equipment that you have. So that should be either in the capital budget. Sometimes for the little items can be popped into the consumables budget. Something, if you're not sure of, clarify with your LAC or ECI coordinator or your delegate. Sometimes it's not particularly clear in the plan, and sometimes with those repairs you may need quotes as well. So something to just keep in mind. So for the process itself, once you've sort of know the equipment, you've maybe done the trial as well if it's required, you have the mid-cost or high-cost reports completed. When they're completed, as parents, you should submit them off to the NDIS, which is at inquiries@ndis.gov.au. You should receive a receipt number saying that this has been processed. Make sure you keep note of that because it's something that you would have to call up and refer to if you do want to speak about it. It's also just to note when it has been processed as well on there, so you can keep tabs of when it should come back to you. I do suggest families calling and following these up. Don't let it fall by the wayside. Maybe pop a little reminder in your calendar every couple of weeks to say, hey, check on this. Once it's done, it then gets assessed by the NDIA's assistive technology team. If this is the case, typically. I know that there have been changes with the PACE system, which is essentially the new NDIS system. Previously, the old one was the CRM. But unfortunately, when they built PACE, PACE and CRM apparently do not talk to one another, and there is no way to seamlessly transition participants off CRM into the new PACE system. So at the moment, I believe that any AT request, if you are not on the PACE system, may trigger a full plan reassessment, because that is the only way that can get you across to the PACE system. So something to keep in mind. It's just something I've heard on the grapevine. It may change once maybe things have improved with technology, or if you are already on the PACE system, I think that this particular process here up on the screen would apply to you. If you're not happy with the funded supports, there are different processes available, and I'm sure everyone's heard these terms thrown around. So I'll go through each of these separately in the next few slides. But the first one here is internal reviews. So when you receive your final NDIS plan, what this means for the internal review is that you have 100 days to lodge a request for an internal review of a decision that has been made for a particular support that's maybe been declined or not the exact number of hours that you're looking for. You can do this by emailing your LAC or ECI coordinator directly. I would advise this, and I would advise to put this in writing so that you actually have record of when this, when you've actually lodged this. In the past, I have had it where it hasn't been processed, and by the time it was picked up, when I was working as an LIC, they sent it through to inquiries, and then it got so delayed in the process, it was past the 100 days. So we had to go through back channels to be able to get the internal review. The important part is that you can only request for a review of the supports that you originally requested in your plan reassessment meeting. So if you've only requested for, say, psychology, OT, and maybe at the time your child didn't need speech, but actually suddenly speech is becoming a challenge, and you're wanting that included. Unfortunately, with the internal review process, you can't go back and request for speech. Doesn't mean that you can't use your funding flexibly, but you can't request for additional hours for speech pathology in this particular case example. One positive thing to note as well with the internal review process is that this also occurs vice versa. Whatever you request for being reviewed is the only things that the NDIA can actually look at. So if you have, say, they've declined your support worker hours, they've declined psychology, they've declined physiotherapy, you can request for those items to be looked at, but they can't touch the other support. So if you're really happy with your capital budget, you're really happy with consumables, they can't touch those budgets when they're doing the internal review. They can only look at what you have requested as well. So it's a bit of a two-way street with the internal review. Do you need additional reports for this? This is something that you may or may not. It really depends. So for example, one of the families that I was helping with, they had supports that were declined, and for reasons that perhaps were not communicated or the delegate didn't understand. So we had an additional meeting where we talked about how can we go through this, go through the carer impact statement so that we could really outline what it is that the family was going through, and to be able to try and explain that in a way that the next delegate could understand. So that is something. It might be a carer impact statement. It might be an additional report to really explain maybe some of the questions for particular items or particular therapies, for example, that may have not been answered in the NDIS report for whatever reason. We can provide those reports as well if need be. I just provided this little snapshot of an example of how to write the internal review request. So if you want to take note of that, feel free. It's just around highlighting what the decline support was, or what the supports that were given perhaps, and then also outline what is it that you expect, what is it that you want to be funded. I usually pop that as a dot point underneath, something along those lines. In terms of change of circumstances, this is different to an internal review because this is around asking for supports that are not included in your plan or that you didn't originally request for in your NDIS plan reassessment meeting. It may also be that perhaps you didn't get a chance to do the internal review process, you had a lot going on in your family and you've missed that deadline. That's also when a change of circumstances can be requested. What do you need? Reports are critical for this. It needs to highlight what the change in circumstances are, or perhaps say, for example, the therapies were not funded, then we highlight how these are beneficial for little Johnny, and that it's because of these intensives that we've made each of these gains. And that's sort of what we highlight in those NDIS reports there. But you do need reports to be able to support your change of circumstances. In my LAC role, I've seen lots of change of circumstances that didn't have any additional information, and there was no need for me to there was nothing for me to go on to be able to say, hey, this is why I could request for this from the NDIA at the time. So that is something to really keep in mind. It's also really important that once you submit the change of circumstances request, the NDIA has an obligation to try and get back to you within 28 days and offer you a meeting time. This is where it's really important to have a good understanding before you lodge any requests. So in requests in terms of internal reviews and change of circumstances, because of the timelines that you have with them and you know that you are going to go through them, let us know as soon as you feel like you are going to go through this, or say, hey, I'm collecting all of my reports because I'm applying for a change of circumstances request. It's the main thing though is that often we get families who've done the request first and then suddenly get a turnaround meeting time and say, hey, I need those reports by next week. Sometimes it's just not, it's physically sometimes impossible for us to be able to schedule those in at such a last minute time. It's such a tight turnaround time for us. So ideally, it is better, and I recommend this for all families, whether you're with NAPA or outside of NAPA or other reports as well, get them done prior to making your request so that you are ready to go. And it also puts a lot less stress on you. There's enough going on in your plates. I'm sure there's, everyone's really busy. There's a lot, there's so much that everyone has to get done. It's just one less thing to stress about if we do it the other way around. The other thing that is important to understand is around the reasons for the decline. Do you have these in writing? I do recommend people get these in writing, because often when we hear them over the phone, maybe we've misunderstood, maybe it's come across the wrong way, maybe we've actually missed something or something wasn't said clearly. So it is important to ask for these to be actually popped in writing for you. And then it also gives you a good reference point too. It gives our therapists a good reference as well. This is something that is probably less known, which is the Participant Information Access Request. Remember here, you are entitled to all of the information that is on your file in the NDIS. So all of the notes that have been taken about your plan reassessment meetings, the reasons why things are declined, you can actually request for this through this little form here that is available on the NDIS website. It's something that it's not necessary, but it can be really helpful to understand specifically why supports were declined so that we can really tailor our clinical justifications to be able to support your child. So I have provided the link there. You can also just Google it as well. It is freely online. It's just not particularly well known. It is also a notoriously slow process. So I would suggest that if you are looking to really fight for a particular support that has been declined, start this process. It's not going to hurt. It can take anywhere between 2 and 6 months. So it's just something to keep in mind if you do need it. Finally, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So you've gone through all of the things, or your supports have been continually declined. What can you do? The next step really is to go through to the AAT. There are a couple of processes there. I have provided a little diagram there which summarizes it, but essentially you need to have your NDIA plan reassessment meeting first. Once you get that back, then you see what supports have been declined or maybe knocked down a little bit, and that's decline number 1. Then you have to go through the internal review process. If at that point it's then declined again, that's the second decline. At this point, you will receive a letter from the NDIS saying, hey, your internal review has come back with the following supports being declined for XYZ reasons. If you wish to appeal these further, then you need to go through to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. And that is when they'll give you all of the instructions. But essentially, you need to apply for that within 28 days of receiving that letter. It's inclusive of that date as well. The other thing is you need to apply for it through the AAT website, not the NDIS website. So I have included the link there if you need. The link is also included in your letter as well, but it's just sometimes people go straight to the NDIS website and it's actually not. It's the AAT website that you need to go to. The typical AAT process, it's something that can be a little bit daunting for families, and this is where I'll just provide a quick summary of this, but the AAT is actually quite good at providing you with the information and step-by-step process with it as well. So typically you'll get notified by the AAT and they'll organize a case conference initially, and that's usually where you as the carer and the NDIA will get together and talk about your different positions. So it will highlight what is it that you've requested, then it will highlight the NDIA's position, and then also highlight what further information is required. From this, it basically generates what we call a statement of issues, and that is when you provide further information. And this is at the second meeting called the conciliation meeting. And again, it's further deliberation, further conversation around what the supports are, why you need them, and those sorts of things. And then sometimes as well at this point, at the conciliation, the NDIA can come back with a counter offer. And it's up to you at that point to decide whether or not you want to go ahead with it or you don't. That's completely up to you. If you don't, or you can't reach a consensus between what it is that you would like to have supported for your child or funded for your child, sorry, then it will proceed to a court hearing where the ultimate decision is decided by a judge at the AAT. What do you need for this process is the statement of issues. That is the absolute key document that we need, particularly here at NAPA. If we have that, we are able to see what is it that they're needing exact information on, and we can provide responses to each of those questions. It's quite an extensive process. We've had a number of therapists had to go through that as well. So those are just some of the important things. So that's the first thing. And when you get that statement of issues, let us know that an appeal, like submit your jot form request, and we can begin that whole process and walk you through it. Finally, external help. It's a draining process for families to go through this whole decline, and you keep fighting and you keep fighting and you keep fighting. I do suggest that it is really helpful to have someone else in your corner just to help take off the load or help lighten the burden. A lawyer could be helpful. Obviously, you might not be able to afford one for whatever reasons. Understandably, they're very expensive, but you might have a friend who has a friend who is a lawyer, might be able to look over the documents and be able to break down some of the legal jargon that comes back. So that could be really helpful. Another of support that you could have is a disability advocacy service. And I've popped a little link there that provides you with different disability advocacy groups in different states around Australia. So you just have to click on your state and find one and give them a call if you are thinking of going with this process. I do suggest contacting them early if you are deciding it, because there can be wait times as well. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're trying to get yourself organized for the fight for a particular support. On a completely different note to NDIS processes, in terms of the NDIS reports and all of that, we have had a lot of questions around functional capacity assessments from our families. And I think this is something that a lot of the delegates have been requesting of families as of late, to say, hey, we need a functional capacity assessment because, you know, maybe you've had a couple of rollovers with your plan and now you're having a full plan reassessment. They're saying maybe it's best to have a full a functional capacity assessment. This is a work in progress here at NAPA. We're really just trying to figure out the logistics of how we're going to do this as well and be able to find a way that best supports our families here. It's something that we are really keen to get going, and we've started the works on this, but we are just sort of working out some of the little finer details about that. So please watch this space. It is coming. We're really excited to bring this to you guys. So do watch our socials, Facebook and Instagram, to keep an eye out for when functional capacity assessments are ready to come your way. And that's it for my presentation. I guess I've seen that there's been a few questions pop up. So Paul, I'm just going to hand this one back to you.
That was amazing, Jackie. I learned so much through that, and what a complicated world that that is. So I'm going to go through just a reminder, everyone who's still online, if you've got a question for Jackie, we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. We've probably got about 15 minutes or so to go through questions. We're not going to be able to get anything that's too specific about anyone's individual situation, so I do encourage you that if you do have something specific to ask of Jackie or of our, as Jackie mentioned, we do have a report lead in each one of our clinics, or if you're not part of, you don't currently come to NAPA, reach out to your local therapist and ask them yourselves. But we're not going to probably be able to answer any specific questions about your certain situation. But we have got a lot of general questions here, so I'll fire them at you, Jackie, if that's okay. But for everyone else online, if you do have any other questions, pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to as many as we can. All right, our first question, Jackie, is, are reports, NDIS reports, I'm assuming, are reports necessary every single review? And if progress is made, will that generally mean a decrease in funded hours?
Yeah, this is a classic question in terms of funding needs, essentially. And the NDIS's aim is to try and make the scheme as sustainable as possible, and there are always funding restraints around that. But it is important to highlight with the NDIS reports, it's not just also highlighting the progress, it's also highlighting actually the impact of your child's disability on their current everyday life. So if we highlight that in the background and the functional implications for your child, where they're actually at, it still paints a picture of how much, like, support your child is really needing, and what is it that we're sort of trying to achieve here? Where can we sort of help them with their funding and their therapeutic support? So if your child does have a lot of high needs that are ongoing, this should be captured in that initial background. And the progress part with the goals, we try and highlight, of course, how beneficial the supports are for your child, and that's why we do have the goals, and highlight all of the other achievements. In terms of the decrease in funding, hopefully, we wish to know. Sometimes it can, I'm not going to lie, it can, but that's where we do need to have pretty strong reports, and you do need to have strong reports from all fronts. Our reports here at NAPA can be quite strong, and it's important to make sure you read over the reports prior to submitting it. And if there's something that you're not happy with, or you think that you're not sure of and you want to clarify further with us, then do make sure that you read your reports prior to submitting it as well. I hope that does answer your question. It doesn't give a clear-cut answer. As an LIC, I tried not to cut funding where I could, but there are pressures within the NDIA as well. So it's something that unfortunately is a forever battle for us, but we do strive with our NDIS reports to really highlight where the needs are, and the impact of your child's disability on everyday life in the family.
Yeah, and I guess the important point there is that, and this is where you may or may not benefit from being part of the NAPA family, in that, we have now across Australia 65 NAPA therapists who are routinely writing reports. So we're constantly learning from experiences out in that about things that are getting knocked back, or things that are going on. So we use that, and Jackie's part of the team who routinely look at our report templates and make adjustments to those report templates. So we are trying to best address the questions that are most commonly coming from the NDIA. So keep that in mind. And as Jackie said, if you're not happy with the report when it comes back, there are opportunities to sort of, have a discussion with your report writer and try and get that. Or the most important thing is to really try and get that briefing process as strong as possible. So you're giving the therapist as much information as possible in the lead-in, so you get a better output at the end. So just answering the first part of that question again, do you think reports are necessary for every review every year?
Your plan may not end every year. It may be every 2 years, maybe every 3 years. So it really depends on when the end date of that plan is. However, if you are having a meeting with, especially for full plan reassessments, yes, you do need to have them. They will expect you to have them. If you don't have them, they will say, hey, there's no evidence. And that was something that used to be real tricky for me as an LAC when parents rocked up to NDIS meetings without any reports. There was nothing for me to write on. When we look at those reports and we build those plans, we used to have to write and take all of the information from the reports and put it all together. It's really important that the information is there, because if it's not there, there's nothing for them to make a decision on. So it is really important.
Yeah, and NDIS reports, remember, are claimable. So if you've got the budget, you can pay for them out of your NDIS budget, right? So. Okay. All right. Next question. All right. Is it fair to say that if the goals set within the plan allow for a therapist to add recommendations, then this would be okay to request, for example, equine therapy? I'm not sure if I'm
trying to understand. Sorry, I'm trying to understand the question as well. Are you wondering if that you...
Halal, are you still online there? Are you online? You can unmute your microphone and maybe ask or clarify that question, please.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Jackie.
Hello.
Hey,
thanks, Jackie. Good. So I'm trying to remember as to when I asked that question. I think it's in regards to our I'm going to say our mainstream therapists, so our physio, OT and speechy, when would they be able to recommend a different therapy style, for example, music therapy that you mentioned, or equine therapy, or Auslan, for example? When would that come in? Say, for example, like an Auslan style of education would be necessary. Would that be fair to say a speech therapist would come in and say, we recommend that this family or that this individual or participant receive funding to access Auslan to further the communication?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So you're wondering where the recommendation should come for particular supports, is that correct? Just to clarify.
What would like, for example, the speech therapist recommend the Auslan coming into place? So we would get it from, say, Deaf Connect, a quote plus their report, and then our speechy would say, yes, we do recommend that they receive Auslan tutoring to further their communication. Would that suffice, or would that be out of scope? Same goes with the equine therapy, and when it comes to, for example, OT and speech and even physio, I guess.
It's something, and I think it's really individual in terms of the supports and how it relates back to, again, it comes back to the RNN criteria. It also comes back to the goals that are in your NDIS plan. But if it's something that you're looking to request for and your therapist is happy to say, hey, yes, I actually think that this could be a really beneficial support, they can definitely make a comment and help to try and make a cohesive approach for that particular therapy. So that's not a problem. It's just that we can't say these are the XYZ reasons and how it's beneficial. It's just not our area of expertise. But yes, we can definitely make a comment.
So how would that work, Jackie, in that if just say Dalal is perhaps thinking about equine therapy for her child, right? She hasn't started it, right? You might think as her therapist that it might be a benefit to her child, but she hasn't started equine therapy. So she can't really go and get a report from an equine therapist. Can she, if she hasn't started it? Or you recommend that she does engage with the equine therapist to get the supporting report to support that part of the plan?
It really comes down to budgets at the end of the day, what you can access and how much flexibility you have, because ultimately you can use your capacity building funding flexibly. So if you do have capacity to go and actually get started on equine therapy, or at least have a trial and get the report done from them, that is probably the number one best way to go, and we can make a supporting comment. If you don't have the budget, it might be something like we've had a discussion with Dalal around the benefits of equine therapy. This is something that is worth exploring as a potential option to support, but and we would recommend further assessment hours for this, or therapy hours, and that would be a delegate's call as to how much and what they want to build into the plan for that particular therapy. So if you do have the budget to actually go get it from that particular therapist, that is my recommendation.
Yeah. Okay, great. And whilst you're not on mute, Dalal, I'm just going to fast forward to your second question and shoot it to Jackie. Jackie, is there any area within the NDIA that talks to chronic and complex conditions in terms of plan management and also the limits that are accessible?
Are you talking about, I'm just trying to understand what particular areas are you talking about with regards to plan management? Are you able to give me an example?
So I know that, I mean, the exact name or phrasing of it has completely escaped my mind, but I know within the NDIA there is a, not an LAC, but it'd be a direct person within the NDIS or NDIA that deals with that particular individual and their team.
I think you're talking.
So does that actually exist? Because when we've asked about it, they've come back and said, well, is, full disclosure, my daughter's name is Naomi. Is your daughter Naomi in a domestic violence dispute? And I'm like, no. Has she been adopted and blah blah blah? I'm like, no. They're like, well, she doesn't qualify.
Yes. So yeah, this is there are different categories that the NDIA actually categorize each of the participants. There's the general, there's the supportive, there's the intensive, and the super intensive. And so for most participants, we sort of fall into the general or supportive categories, and there's different criteria for each of those. And then to jump up to then intensive and super intensive, where it's managed directly by the NDIA, then you need to meet certain criteria, and that's why they ask you those questions. So those intensive and super intensive categories have very specific criteria to be able to meet, to be able to be categorized and then managed directly by the NDIA.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Heading back to a few other questions. Christy asks, where do supportive shoes such as Piedro's or Billy's shoes sit in relation to low-cost tech? Are they included or only with a specific therapist recommendation?
Yeah, this is a great question. Actually, it does sit in low cost. If you do fill out when you are filling the job form request in the low cost section, just write in there Piedro's or Billy shoes as part of that, and we'd be able to justify that easily on our end. Most of our therapists, or all of our therapists, are very familiar with these shoes. That's an easy, quick one for us. And we don't have a specific recommendation as such, but it's just when we write in the NDIS report, we just need to add a couple of sentences saying why these shoes are important, essentially, and why they should be funded.
And I think Alicia was asking this question. I think this one popped up when you were talking about the mid-cost things, and you were saying that you can only have, it's a line item, right? She's saying, is it one invoice or one item?
Yes, sorry, to clarify, it is one invoice, because often the invoice will have a piece of equipment with all of the added options, like additional supports and things like that. So, and it includes delivery and all of that. So it is one invoice for a particular item.
Okay, but if you were getting a stander and a walker from the same company, that's two items, right?
Then that's two items.
Yeah,
and
okay.
yes, correct.
Yes.
That would be two items, and it would usually come as two invoices as well.
Two separate invoices.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And second question from Christy, do high cost equipment requests trigger a new plan or reset the plan for 12 months? Get a lot of chat about this.
Yeah, I haven't heard about it being reset for another 12 months. Oh, actually, I understand where you're coming from, I think. So typically what happens with the AT process is that it will come through to the AT team. The AT team, generally then they'll approve it. Hopefully they do. And then when they approve it, then that plan start date, because they have to basically rebuild the plan and put it in, then there is a new plan date. So in my experience, often it just, like, if it's a 24 plan, it then just gets a new 24-month plan date. Sometimes in my experience though, the planner has gone through and has only put it for the remainder of that plan. So if you've got only 6 months left in your plan, they will only put in 6 months left of your funding. That is if the AT process is with just the AT team. Right now, if you're between PACE and CRM, it may trigger the full plan review. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Jane asks, what is the role of a LAC?
So that's an interesting question. The role of an LAC has changed since I was an LAC. At the time, the NDIA was very overwhelmed, and the original plan was for the NDIA to do all of the planning meetings. The LACs were supposed to do the connections and essentially the support coordination role. When they became overwhelmed, that's when they passed on the planning meetings to the LACs or the ECI coordinators as well. And we started doing the planning meetings. And that's when I was an LAC. So I built all those plans. I held all those meetings and I did all of that. Now they're trying to reverse that process. So all of your meetings are back with the NDIA. And now your LACs are essentially connecting you with supports in the community, and they're supposed to check in with your NDIS plan, and if you've got any questions, they answer all of those queries. For most of our participants, you will be connected with either in Victoria, it would be a partner in the community. In Victoria, it's usually Latrobe Community Health Services or Brotherhood of St. Lawrence. And I'm not sure about the other states. I do apologize about that, but it would be a partner in the community that you contact. And usually, actually, it's kind of a good thing, because if you have any questions, rather than going through the NDIA inquiries line, contact your LAC office directly. They often pick up at least.
Right. Oh, here's a great question from Nora. How is, and something that you've probably got a lot of experience in recently since joining NAPA, Jackie's, how is requesting intensive therapy different to regular therapy requests? And how do you prove that intensive therapy is value for money?
Yeah, this is, for us here at NAPA, with our intensive therapies, they are different in the sense that we are basically providing a high frequency of therapies in a short amount of time. So we're essentially trying to provide, like, say, for example, our standard is 3 weeks, it's 15 days. We're trying to essentially provide you 3 months worth of therapy or 15 weeks worth of therapy in a short amount of time. It allows for us, there is evidence that shows that intensive therapies have benefits. We do have some of those articles as well that Lou has kindly provided for us in the past. But this is what NAPA was based off of, and this is the model that we have worked with. And this is why it is different to regular therapy, because we really work on those skills and really focus in on a particular skill so that your child can make gains. And we're basically sort of having that impact in a short-term time frame. Sorry.
And I guess when it comes to the next year's report, you justify, or you talk about the gains from the intensives done in the previous years to help you justify the need for them in the forthcoming year.
Correct, exactly. And that's how we prove. That's why we have very specific goals. And that's why the goal, we have that first stage to really hone in on what is it exactly that you're wanting to work on. And then therefore really showing the differences between baseline, what the intensive therapy goal is, and all of the other goals in between. And we can actually showcase that. That's how we prove that intensive therapy is value for money, because you have made these gains. And if we are providing an NDIS report and you've had a few intensive therapies, we can show really from baseline all the way to the end over that 12-month period. And usually, in my experience, it's been pretty positive for most of our kiddos.
Right. All right. We've got a couple of minutes left. We're just going to run through the last couple of questions. I'm sorry, we're not going to probably get to all of them. But you mentioned if you're struggling and you need a bit of outside help, the potential for getting a lawyer involved, or
disability advocacy.
Disability advocate, sorry, not delegate advocate. What about, I know, and I do hear some parents talking about this, when you're pulling your hair out and going and getting the help of a politician or a local MP or something who can sometimes intervene and push things along. The question here is, where does intervention from a local MP come into your ability to get supports approved for a plan review? Is it something you can rely on?
It's not something I have personally done. I do know of families that have gone through that process. There was a family in NAPA Melbourne that did go through that process. They went all the way through to the MP. They did get what they want, actually. That particular family, they were very vocal, and sometimes it is about the squeakiest wheel getting grease. So sometimes I think that from what I have heard, there have been positive benefits, but how to go about it, I'm not 100% sure. It's not something that I have done, but it may be worth reaching out to maybe our NAPA family Facebook group, or out to some of the families that you have contact with, and see if they have gone through that process, and maybe they might be able to provide you with some insight on that.
Right. That's a really good point, guys. For those of you who aren't already on our NAPA Parents Facebook, so NAPA has official NAPA Facebook group, but there's a NAPA Parents Facebook group where you can ask a lot of these questions, and you'll get a lot of responses from families who have been through these things and asked the questions and done that sort of stuff. So it's a very rich source if you're going through things. So you utilize that if you're not already on that. It always fascinates me, the stories you hear from some people's experience with going to the LAC or going to reviews and stuff like that. And one of these things just popped up here. This person here, I think it's Ange, was told 2 weeks ago that reports are not considered good value for money. comment?
I do have a comment on that, because then it's a catch-22. If you don't provide the report, then they ask you, where's the report?
Yeah,
So
you risk losing a lot of time, don't you, if you're not prepared, right? If they get an
Correct.
LAC like you that goes, where's the report? Right. I guess it can depend in that respect about what LAC you get, right?
Unfortunately, yes, it
Yeah.
sometimes is luck of the draw.
That's
but
the
I would say,
inconsistencies.
the inconsistencies. But I would say it's better to be prepared than under prepared. At least you've
Yeah.
got the information ready to go.
Yeah, great. So last question. My plan, this is a specific question, but we'll just finish off on it. My plan expires in August 24. Do I contact my LAC or NDIS to book the review meeting?
They would actually contact
They should
you,
contact you.
but yeah, they should contact you.
Yeah.
But if you want to be proactive, absolutely go ahead, contact the LAC, because if you have an LAC, that's essentially going to be considered as the check-in call, and the LAC will do a couple of things in the back end to flag it with the NDIS to then organize the meeting for you. So I would say, if you want to be proactive, contact your LAC to organize that meeting. Otherwise, they'll contact you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. That was really, really fascinating to hear that. I want to thank you for putting all that time, and obviously a lot of time went into preparing that presentation. I will say to you, to everyone online, utilize that NAPA Facebook page. But as we've mentioned a couple of times tonight, there is a report lead in each clinic. So reach out to Jackie if you're in Melbourne. Our report lead in Sydney is Diane, and our report lead in Queensland is Nicole. So if you've got questions, if you're wondering what to do, just send the question, ring up and ask. It's better to be more prepared, right? So thank you for all the work you've put into that, Jackie. I hope you all found it worthwhile. A quick reminder of our 3 remaining upcoming NAPA nights. We've got a NAPA nights on the 28th of May on connection and co-regulation, run by our therapist Maggie from the Sydney Clinic. We've got one on the 14th of May on accessing travel, accommodation and respite through your NDIS plan. So that's on the 14th of May. And on the 18th of June, we've got one on nutritional tips for kids with complex needs. So again, very specific topics that we aim to help you guys with other stuff going on in your life. So please log in to Eventbrite or the links on our Facebook page or any of our newsletters, all that sort of stuff, to get your free tickets to all of those events. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, and a big thank you to Jackie for putting the presentation together. And we hope to see you at one of our future NAPA Nights events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. See you later.